All right, let's jump right in. Today we're unpacking a massive, heavily documented disconnect. We're going to explore the massive gap between the official, publicly stated mission of federal investigations and the actual documented reality of surveillance. And the crazy part? This reality is sitting right there in the government's own internal files. It is an absolutely incredible look at how massive surveillance apparatuses actually function on the ground versus how they're justified on paper.
To really wrap our heads around exactly how this happened, we have to look directly at the official records produced by Homeland Security Investigations, or HSI. Now, HSI is a huge investigative arm of the federal government, and for this explainer, we're zeroing in on the official paper trail from two major coordinated federal operations. Internally, these were called Operation Puppet Master and Project Whipples. And just to be clear, we are not using outside speculation here. We are going straight to the source documents typed up by the very agents conducting the investigations.
And right away, there is a sheer, undeniable contrast. On one hand, you have the government's stated mandate. They were supposedly tasked with combating violent opportunists and stopping property destruction. But then, on the other side, you have their own internal admissions of what they were actually doing, spending tremendous resources and time surveilling nonviolent civic organizations. It's a classic, textbook case of the stated mission drifting wildly from the actual execution.
Section 1. The official mission. The mandate to stop violence.
According to the official case opening reports, the Department of Homeland Security launched these investigations with a very specific, high-stakes target in mind. They explicitly claimed they were going after networks providing material support to agitators, people involved in rioting, property destruction, and direct assaults on federal agents. This wasn't framed as just some casual monitoring operation. No, it was pitched as an urgent response to violent and dangerous criminality.
The overarching justification for all this, which was actually grounded in a national security presidential memorandum, was to completely dismantle organized criminal activity. They wanted to stop what they called sophisticated terrorist financing and protect federal property. Now, what's really vital to keep in mind here is that while they launched this massive investigative dragnet, they explicitly promised on paper that they would continue to safeguard the rights of peaceful demonstrators. That was the official guarantee.
Section 2. The ground reality. Undercover at the library.
So, the crucial point is comparing that high-stakes mandate of hunting violent extremists with what undercover agents actually spent their time doing. Because instead of infiltrating violent cells or underground crime syndicates, agents documented themselves attending incredibly mundane gatherings. We're talking about virtual Zoom calls, illegal observer training, and climate action meetings held in public libraries and local churches. These are exactly the kinds of locations where everyday citizens gather to discuss civic issues, not exactly shadowy terrorist hideouts, right?
And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates the irony of the whole situation. Just look at the language from an undercover agent's own typewritten report after attending an upstander legal observer training in a local suburb. The agent explicitly confessed that they simply observed and concluded, quote, "There do not appear to be violations relating to 18 U.S.C. 111 or threats to public safety." I mean, think about that. They went undercover at a training teaching people how to legally observe law enforcement and documented finding absolutely zero violations of law.
It gets even more clear-cut. In an undercover report from a meeting of the Sunrise Movement, which, if you don't know, is a really well-known group focused on climate change and social justice, the undercover agent literally typed into this official document that the organization focused on peaceful protests. The agency knew exactly who they were surveilling, and they readily acknowledged in their own files that the group's intent was entirely nonviolent.
Yet, despite repeatedly acknowledging that these groups were nonviolent, the surveillance didn't just stop. Actually, scratch that, it escalated. For example, at a meeting held at the Prince of Peace Lutheran Church, agents captured the license plates of attendees right out in the parking lot. They then took those plates, ran them through law enforcement databases, checked social media profiles, and compiled deep intel workups. These workups included the personal, family, and employment information of the attendees. Just imagine going to a community meeting at your local church to discuss a civic issue and ending up in a comprehensive federal intelligence dossier.
Section 3. The financial dragnet, searching for terrorist financing.
HSI launched a sweeping financial dragnet, supposedly hunting for domestic terrorist financing to back up their claims of organized criminal networks. But when they actually issued those administrative subpoenas, what did they uncover? Well, instead of illicit transactions funding criminal acts, they found standard, everyday union operational expenses. They were literally digging through union member dues, retiree annuity payments, strike supplies, and medical expenses.
In fact, an official summary of a Fedwire search targeting the Service Employees International Union, or SEIU, proves that agents were scrutinizing the everyday financial lifeblood of a massive, legally operating labor union. They were digging into pension fund expenses and investments, all under the incredibly heavy guise of stopping domestic terrorism.
And the net-day cast was astonishingly wide. They didn't just zero in on one group. These financial subpoenas swept up the private data of massive international labor unions like SEIU and the Communications Workers of America, or CWA. The Dragnet even crossed borders, looking into the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers up in Canada. And alongside them, local civic nonprofits like the Sunrise Movement and Voices for Racial Justice were completely swept into this massive financial surveillance operation.
The heavily redacted results from a PayPal and Venmo subpoena regarding the nonprofit group Voices for Racial Justice are just visually staggering. All those black redaction blocks represent the private financial transactions of everyday citizens who were simply donating to civic causes. All of this was swept out by a federal agency searching for a crime they just couldn't seem to find.
Section 4. The missing criminal predicate. A legal disconnect. Now, to legally justify this kind of federal surveillance and to issue grand jury subpoenas, investigations require what is known as a criminal predicate. Basically, that just means investigators must have foundational evidence that a specific crime is actually occurring. The federal government gave sworn grand jury testimony that these wide-reaching operations were indeed backed by a criminal predicate, but as we've clearly seen, their own on-the-ground paperwork tells a completely different story.
In fact, federal judges have explicitly weighed in on the exact types of activities agents were dedicating so much time to monitoring. Things like activists safely observing and recording ICE vehicles. As a federal court order clearly states, any citizen who happens across law enforcement activity has a constitutional right to observe it, to record it, and to mention it to anyone they like. So the courts are directly confirming that what HSI was monitoring were perfectly legal exercises of First Amendment rights, not criminal acts.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, we are left to ponder a pretty heavy contradiction. We have sworn grand jury testimony claiming these operations were targeting violent terrorism, yet the agents' own typed reports repeatedly admit they were monitoring peaceful assemblies, finding absolutely no violations of law, and scooping up the mundane financial records of labor unions and nonprofits. It leaves us with one absolutely critical question. If the government's own paperwork admits there was no crime, what was the true purpose of this massive surveillance apparatus? It's a fundamental question about power, privacy, and oversight that definitely demands an answer.